Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Welcome, Next Economy Now listeners. I'm Erin Axelrod, a partner and worker owner at Lift Economy, and I'm joined here today with Kevin Bayuk, and we're going to talk a little bit about Next Economy Living, which we're so excited to see registrations already rolling in for the question and answer sessions that we're hosting in fall of 2024. So we're really, really grateful for the interest we're seeing already. And we are here today to talk about the context. Why are we doing Next Economy Living? What inspired it? Who is it for? And what does the training or learning journey, if you will, consist of? So Kevin, I'm so glad to be in conversation with you about this.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. I'm excited to talk about it as well and excited to see so much interest in this very important endeavor.
So that's probably a great starting off point. We wanted to touch on some of the reasons why. So why are we doing this? What need is it meeting? And where did this come from? It's been a number of years in the making, Kevin. What would you say?
Yeah, well, I think it's core to our thinking about a theory of change for how do we live into Lift Economy's vision of transforming the very nature of the economy to work for the benefit of all life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this has been the through line since Lift Economy was founded over a decade ago. So this learning journey is really created to address some of what we often refer to as the root causes and contributing factors to core challenges that stakeholders, many of you, our listeners, encounter as you're out in the world creating this next economy. And so I think we are going to go through some of those root causes now just to level set. And one of those is this lack of inspiration for how the economy could look different. How could the economy function? How could it be of service to life? An example of this as it relates to our own lives, I know I encounter often this lack of inspiration for how it would even be possible to meet our nutritional needs without contributing to a food system that, for example, exploits farm workers, or food travels long, long miles from where it's grown to where it's consumed. There's just sort of this, well, that's just how it's done. So that's part of what we want to push against and question and grapple with in the training, and also kind of find pathways out of that normative pitfall of our economic system. So that would be one root cause of there's this lack of inspiration for how the economy could be different. And how do we get to a place where there is inspiration and there are case studies and visibility to the possible pathways out? Anything to add on that, Kevin?
Yeah, I think when we, in the Next Economy MBA and just people we talk to, sometimes when we talk about the word economy, people are thinking about businesses, nonprofits, or maybe they're thinking about co-ops or perpetual purpose trusts, but groups of humans coming together in some kind of organized way to produce goods or services to meet human needs. And we think of the economy in the context sometimes of this transactional, let's find these institutions or organizations and let's be part of those. And that's the intermediary to provide for needs, food, water, housing, community, all the things that we as humans need to thrive. And one of the challenges and opportunities that we often provocatively try and present is to rethink of the economy at a more first principles perspective. Think of the economy as what are the collective set of strategies we as humans have used, and can use to meet our needs now and into the future. And that doesn't necessarily mean we need these intermediary institutions. Like you're talking about food systems as an example, like there are many people on earth today who play some role in provisioning for their own needs by growing or foraging their own food, for providing for their nutrition, without the alternative or the business as usual kind of norm of getting a job, getting a wage, using the wage to go to a market and then to transact and purchase food. And there's a thousand reasons why. We'll talk about why it's nuanced and complex. And the message is not everybody needs to grow their own or provide for their own needs. But by expanding our perspective as to what the economy is, creates a huge amount of inspiration and opportunity for what role we might have in meeting human needs in ways that can be a benefit to all life, including, in some cases, providing for our own needs or collaboratively in our families, our communities, or our regions to provision for our own needs without the need for wages in institutions or organizations and transactions. And like you're saying, there's kind of a disbelief, a disenchantment, a feeling of resignment, like people feeling forced to participate into like a wage economy where it's like, gosh, the only way I can really reliably meet my needs is by trying to make as much money as possible to be able to afford to survive. And there's lots of reasons why that's true, right? And why I can imagine somebody having that perspective. And yet what we know from our lived experience and from models and from stories that we're going to tell in this learning journey is there are things that we can do that don't rely on perpetuating that system of economic transaction and wage activity to be able to reliably provide for needs. And it comes down to like a cultural change of how we think about meeting our needs and how we live. And I think it's important. One of the reasons why I think we're doing this is just that conversation doesn't have a landing place very often. There's so many constraints that make it difficult to take those kind of actions. And we'll talk about some of those in this conversation. But it's also just not true in many cases that there's nothing to do. So that sense of like resignment or cynicism of like, gosh, there's just nothing. There's no alternative. There's no way that we could change how we go about meeting our needs other than trying to make as much money as possible. And you see it, like people will say like, you ask somebody on the street or that your neighbor, like, would you like to be a millionaire? You might hear them say like, I think so. Because like if I had lots of money, then I could reliably provide for myself and my community in some way. And so many things come back to strategies that fall into the complicity traps of perpetuating the business as usual economy. And so when we talk about a next economy, it's not just about every institution being more shared power, cooperative, more collaborative, more life-serving, more regenerative. It's not just about changing the nature of business. It's actually changing the nature of culture and how we think about meeting our needs. So there's a lot to say about all these things, but that's one of the reasons, the whys that stands out to me. What would you build on that, Erin? What else do you want to say about that?
Yeah, another why that ties with what you just shared about how it's extremely hard for people to imagine another way, right? We're so steeped in the waters we swim in of capital being the primary way we mediate our needs that it's hard for people to imagine another way, even though, as you alluded to, Kevin, there are millions of people around the globe that do not use money to access their food and nutrition and calories, millions, if not billions. And so this question of cannot imagine another way. Well, another why of why we're doing this is as we've studied the economic realities, we're actually positing that if we don't address the current lifestyle strategies for meeting needs, that affluent world humans, you and I sitting in front of a computer, 1.5 billion people today, if we don't address these strategies that we're currently using, we may not have a livable future. And so it's not that there actually has to be another way. That's what we're saying. There's got to be another way because the world's equitable distribution of resources depends on it. Our own well-being, affluent world humans, the well-being for folks to be able to break free from the limiting traps of just using money to meet our need for community and wholeness and health and well-being, we have to try other strategies. It's existential for us. So that's a big thing to drop in the middle of the room there.
You're saying if we don't change the habits and behaviors of norms of the, say, 1.5 billion or 2 billion affluent world people in the world today, then we don't actually have a livable future. And so, yeah.
And so being able to reckon with that in community, not isolating and shame spiraling and throwing up our hands and going away and kind of avoiding that truth and that reality, but actually grappling with it in community and developing some shared analysis and shared tools and support networks. That's part of why we're doing this training.
Totally. Building on that, this change, if we could wave a magic wand and all of a sudden that culture of people who are not maybe intentionally, but almost certainly not intentionally contributing to wanton waste consumption, conspicuous waste from the linear throughput economy, the business as usual economy, feeling forced to get a wage, contribute to an organization that's contributing to that, try to get money to meet needs or save money to retire, and all those kind of business as usual living strategies, that lifestyle and change. What's one thing that's happening is the aspiration, the media and the stories of that lifestyle is being continued to be exported to more and more cultures, more and more communities on planet Earth, such that the kind of aspiration for what is a good life is kind of starting to mirror the business as usual media propagated through essentially propaganda, what the business as usual system does to manufacture demand. So, it's this self-fulfilling type of trap where the business as usual economy says, hey, this is what a good life is. And with the pervasive nature of media, then people become convinced that not only is that what I want, but the only strategy to get there is to engage in being complicit and supportive of the business as usual economy. And that economy is quickly moving past the planetary boundaries for survival. And so it's self-terminating. It's suicidal to continue that. So this mandate that we have to figure out a different way to organize our basic living strategies. It's that kind of urgent and that kind of imperative. I do want to turn to building off that a practical, maybe more practical and less holistic of a reason. When we do work with participants in our Next Economy MBA or in consulting work, and people do want to do I want to work with the nonprofit or the local community-based organization that's doing ecosystem restoration or that's doing dire food security work in our community. They typically find that those nonprofits and co-ops can't provide wages that are competitive with the business as usual corporation or entity that is not treating the soil well, not enhancing biodiversity, the organization that is externalizing, as the business as usual economy says, the costs of the way in which they exploit nature or people and externalizing that cost to society and not internalizing it in their cost of goods. And those corporations in many cases pay higher wages or can pay higher wages than the organization that is internalizing those costs in order to be able to provide goods or services. And so a side effect of somebody voluntarily and courageously in community finding ways to meet their needs, their living needs, food, water, shelter, etc., in ways that don't rely on wages and transactions, dollars and cents, currency to meet their needs, they might be able to actually go ahead and say, yes, I can take that job at a lower wage because I have a multiplicity of ways that I'm meeting my needs for housing, food, clothing, community, material, rather than just having to rely on wage work to actually meet those needs. And so if there were a growing network of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of people who were able to find ways to meet their needs at lower cash cost, then there might be the opportunity for some percentage of those people to say, I'm going to actually voluntarily take a lower wage because I don't rely on wages in the same way to meet my needs.
And that network actually already exists. We're just going to pull back the curtain, visibilize some of those stories because, as you said, media has been captured. And so the stories that get airtime are not folks that are voluntarily reducing dependency on reliance on cash to mediate their needs. The stories that get covered in mainstream corporate media or most of media these days are more facilitating those tropes of accumulate more wealth and earn more money and have luxurious consumption habits as a result. So that network exists, and we'd like more people to be connected and see that it's right here in our communities and be connected to people who have a lot of skills to share about how they've been creative in their own ways to get liberated from those traps.
I think that community or community of practice is a really important part for a variety of reasons, including mental health. The affluent world in this kind of conspicuous consumption paradigm, there's a tragedy of alienation, loneliness, or I meet people who are, when they learn through unlearning, oftentimes to discover that their very habits and the way they think about saving for retirement or the way they bank or their job that they have, they find that they're complicit in perpetuating a system of harm that they do not intend. And that system of harm, militarism and ecosystem exploitation and social exploitation and child slavery and so many different things, these externalized outcomes from their habits, there's such a crushing blow to their psyche of like, oh my God, I do not want to be I don't want to be complicit in that. And it can lead to depression, anxiety, paralysis of like, I don't even want to get up in the morning knowing that I'm part of perpetuating this system. It doesn't feel right. It's not what I want. And so there's this latent hunger that we find of like, there has to be a different way for me to live in alignment with my values. And maybe they've seen tokenizing things of like, well, put your consumption in alignment with your values, but they do some more discernment. They're like, I can maybe reduce harm by making better consumption choices, but I want to go further. Like, I want to find ways to live where it feels like mentally clean and clear. Like, okay, I can be at peace with my own life and how I live because I know I'm contributing towards a world as I want it to be rather than by default contributing to a world that's perpetuating harm to others and to a livable future. So that mental health piece is something that there's people who come to me every day who are like, I want to change how I live, but it's hard. I don't know how, or I need a community or support on how to figure out how to do that.
that connection is so key, because oftentimes we see when we get so clear about how broken the system is, it can be very ostracizing to talk about it with other people, because other people also are suffering in that same debilitating lack of awareness of what to do. And so sometimes those conversations will get squashed because there doesn't seem to be a time or place for it, and it's so all-consuming. So this is a great segue to talking about who this training is for. Would you like to share some observations?
Totally. Yeah. In general, maybe broadest frame would be any person who wants to find ways in a community of support to help from a mutual ideation, mutual potentially material support, figure out how to change how they live. But in terms of identities, those might be people who are thinking about, how do I get my money out of Wall Street and still plan for some notion of a reliably prosperous future in the world when I might, quote unquote, retire or not be able-bodied or not be able to work in some way. Certainly, people who are already pursuing this interest in permaculture or other lifestyle change paradigms. There's a bunch of maybe culturally attractive containers that we find people who are interested in this kind of living. They might be attracted to minimalism. There's documentaries and books, and people are like, oh, I want to minimalize. So anybody who responds to minimalism might be like, oh yeah, there's more to just minimizing. What else can I do with my life energy to actually enhance impact in my community? Or some people are attracted to, there are some cultural breakthrough stories about, how do I live zero waste or no plastic living? And I've seen those stories pop up and people being attracted to that. Like, oh, I want to live like that. I want to live a zero waste lifestyle. How do I do that? And then to recognize that, oh, beyond waste, I could think about my civic engagement and my media behaviors and so many other aspects of living. I imagine young people, maybe college students or people who are studying sustainability or are interested in regeneration, whether it's ecosystem restoration or just regenerative concepts in general, might be really attracted to wanting to figure out some of the details and be in a community of practice around how to orient and design their life to align with their values. There's others too. I'm sure I'm missing a few of the archetypes and populations and identities, Erin, that we've come across. Who else is this for?
Well, as I'm hearing you list out these diverse identities, it does bring to mind something that we always like to underscore when we're talking about this type of approach to redesign and life design. And just to name that there are systemic barriers, especially for those who have some form of marginalized identity, whether it be women, person of color, able-bodied, disability, indigenous, shelterless populations. There's a level of privilege that sometimes comes with asking these questions around life redesign. And we are intentionally trying to cultivate a space where we can create avenues for all walks of life to contribute to this dialogue and discourse. So we're intentionally, all of our programs are always priced with no one turned away for lack of funds. And we recognize that even with, creative pricing schemes and that sort of thing, just having the mental bandwidth to be able to take time and space away from the day-to-day of putting food on the table can be a privilege.
Totally. And I see this dynamic all the time with this dialogue or this discourse about changing habits, behaviors, and living. And there's two things I want to say about it, like building off of this privilege and positionality frame that you're talking about, is what next economy living is something where it's like, oh, everybody needs to grow their own food. Because obviously somebody's going to say there's 1,000 raw problems with that. Like, I don't have any time to do that. I'm working 3 jobs. I'm taking care of my elders or I'm taking care of children. Like, there's no way that I can participate in provisioning my own food. So this is a non-starter for me. Why are you talking about changing my habits? The system has made it so that I can't take that step, that particular step. And that's just one example, but it would be ignorant of us to suggest that there's a simple recipe for any one individual of like, here are the things that you need to do, and you just didn't know about them. And so shame on you, or you should feel guilty because you are not doing the things to live with your values. It's decidedly challenging and very particular to the individual based on their privilege, positionality, intersectional identities, and where they're situated. Each of us are coming to the idea of changing our habits, behaviors, and norms from a different point of privilege, whether that we have time affluence or whether we have resources or whether we can invest in ourselves in learning and sharing in these ways. And like you said, there's a huge amount of people on the planet who are participating and meeting their needs not through the business as usual transactional economy perforce by default. That's the only thing that is accessible to them as a way to meet their needs. And these are the teachers. These are the people who can share how to use these strategies. In our experience, for most people, there's something to learn. And I want to say for every people, but I want to make sure that I'm not trying to be absolutist. I'm thinking for most people, maybe most every people, there is another step. So no matter what you are doing in terms of adapting your lifestyle to live within your values and live in ways that are compatible with a livable future for humanity, there's probably another thing that you could do. And that thing might be teaching others, or it might be expanding your agency to support more community members, or maybe it's just reducing your consumption of energy in some simple way, whatever. There's likely an additional step for all of us. And creating a container for learning that is aware and sensitive to the diverse privilege and positionality, I think is really key. Because so many people, when they enter into thinking about this question of living and our habits and behaviors, feel a sense of, if they're aware of the complicity, they feel either a sense of guilt and shame in terms of what they're not doing, and that could be paralyzing, and or the business as usual economy gives some propaganda to hang our belief systems on. An example would be, it's the business as usual economy created things like the ecological footprint as a way to try and promulgate the idea that individuals are responsible. So you think of a situation like species extinction or climate change or hunger or thirst or social inequity and all the problems of the world. There is kind of a pattern of business as usual trying to send the message that this is your fault as an individual and you are responsible. And that has, I think, rightly been assessed and analyzed, and many people realize, like, hey, it's not individual action. It's clearly these system dynamics. It's capitalism, racialized capitalism, the business as usual economy, multinational corporations, shareholder capitalism, and all the trappings of the systemic forces and the collusion with the governance system and corporate capture of government, the education system, the media system, this nested, interconnected set of system dynamics. Those are the things that are driving species extinction, climate change, war, militarism, all the things that we don't want. And the space to have the conversation to acknowledge that maybe both things can actually have some partial truth to it. Meaning, yes, the system is something that needs to change, which means we need to organize collectively and actually transform and dismantle very foundational systems of economy, governance, education, media. Yes, the system is complicit. And then simultaneously, it's also partially true that our individual actions, there is some individual responsibility in terms of the collective strategies that we use to meet our needs are contributing to those very same system dynamics. And that both and that space for like, where can we talk about both? Where it can both be true that we can change ourselves and our habits, and we can both simultaneously work on the system change needs at the same time, collectively, collaboratively in a community. That conversation, I just don't know where else. One of the reasons we're trying to do this and create a community to move together here is I don't see where it's rare the places where that type of both and integrative conversation and action is happening. I don't know if that's true for you, Erin, but that's what I see for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So kind of with that laid out as a fundamental guiding kind of design principle, if you will, for this training, a few other people or identities who might benefit from this come to mind. Folks engaged in mutual aid or activism spaces would be one place where we've certainly seen a lot of creativity and skill building already. But as you said, there's always a step to go further. And then if you imagine folks with access to wealth or stewarding philanthropic resources or even investing resources, this is a beautiful space for folks like that, because the more we can free ourselves from the binary that all of my security is bound up in how much wealth I am accumulating, the freer we are to be able to deploy that capital in meaningful ways that can actually affect that privilege and positionality for more folks to join into this movement, to have the breathing room and spaciousness to even be able to consider engaging in systems transforming ways with the economic spaces. Healers, regenerative textile enthusiasts, folks who, read about the petrochemicals in our clothing and are looking for other pathways out. Boy, there's so many more, but we'll keep it there, and so that we can share a bit more about what the training is going to look like.
Yeah. And training, learning experience, learning community might be the best label for what the Next Economy Living initiative is meant to be. One thing we've done over the last few years is held workshops and discussions and dialogue with various stakeholders in the Lyft economy community to create a framework for thinking about how might we organize a learning community around transforming living. And one thing that's emerged from that is something that we call the Next Step Framework. And it's a series of areas, if you will, domains of living, things that we do as people to meet our needs. And the labels include, food resilience, water resilience, energy resilience, material resilience, financial resilience, housing resilience, personal health and mental well-being, civic participation, and media health. These are some of the domains where we've done some learning and listening about what are some of the steps that people are taking in each of these areas, essentially to wean off of or divorce themselves from being dependent upon a complicit lifestyle that is supporting the business as usual economy, and how can we change our habits to be more voluntarily interdependent with each other to meet our needs individually, communally, in more ways that are resilient and, again, prefigurative of an economy where this is normal and easy. And anybody who looks at those areas and domains and even looks at the steps that we hope to share information and inspiration around in this learning community will recognize that the reason these things are difficult is some of those systemic factors. So you'll see in some of the steps that there's not just individual actions to take where possible, but there's also systemic organizing actions or collaborations that are going to be required to make it easier and easier for other people, fellow neighbors, community members to take these actions. Erin, what else do you want to say about what the Next Step Framework offers and how we're going to facilitate some of this learning together?
Well, it's going to be highly participant driven, as we love to do even with our MBA training. The questions, the curiosities, the inspirations are going to be driven by participants. even the date and time is we're going to get some feedback from participants in these upcoming Q&A sessions. So we hope you'll join us for that. So this kind of interactivity is going to be critical because there's so many different directions that we could take this. And we deeply believe that when Kevin referred to those steps, this is not a linear staircase. These are steps, almost if you would picture a map of a terrain. There's many different possible side trails that you could go on. And so the steps are more self-directed and looking at what skills we have to bring to the table. What are our strengths? Where are areas that we've already honed some adaptability and facility with? Maybe I hesitate to give an example, but the places where we're strong can be places where we share with others, share tools and strategies with others. And then that opens up spaciousness within ourselves for compassion, self-compassion of places we can improve upon. So a lot of holding a compassionate space, a lot of meeting people where they're at, but not leaving them there, as our mentor, Pandora Thomas, often says. That's a quote from her. And actually, one of our MBA participants this morning asked, what are bridge resources between the kind of business as usual economy and the next economy? So when I think about that, I think about having case stories of people who have made a leap, made a cultural leap, or made a transition in their own life from maybe home ownership to, I'm thinking about Jewel Pearson, this amazing tiny house advocate who asked the question, why aren't there a lot of Black women or Black people in the tiny house movement? And she was able to create this whole community that really kind of nuances, there are reasons why the tiny house movement has been so inaccessible and exclusive. And so she created media and content and examples. And so this training, we're going to share case stories that we've come across where people have made that cultural shift and hopefully crowdsource from the community as well, examples that are inspiring them, that are making it more possible to ultimately take this into their own lives.
Exactly. So we'll be sharing information, like sharing the framework as it's been co-created from the stakeholders that we've been interacting with over years, and then some inspiration of real people taking real actions to know that this isn't science fiction, that people are actually making these changes in their lives. And then we'll offer some time for reflection, and then community practice, essentially identifying what is my next step in any of those domains, including the facilitators. We all have a next step to take pretty much in every domain, is my guess. Again, I don't want to be absolutist about it, but it seems to me when I meet people that there's another thing that they can do. And then identifying our next step, we're going to create in the container of the learning community a place where people could request or solicit feedback, advice, resources. How can I take this next step? And let me maybe give some examples along one of the themes, one of these areas in the next step. Say like financial resilience is one of the themes in the next step framework. And, some of the steps, again, like Erin said, in this, there's no ladder of like before and after. Everybody's going to be at a different starting point. Again, oftentimes based on their privilege and positionality and where they are at in their life design. So I'm going to just name a few of these steps, but they don't have to be a linear progression. So in financial resilience, a step might be, and I don't want to make it sound like it's trivial because I was about to say it's simple, but like start by assessing personal spending patterns over a 1 month, 3 month, and 1 year period. So it means actually developing a budget for food, housing, etc. Some of you listening to this are like, duh, I did that 20 years ago, Kevin. Like, obviously I've been doing that, and that's fine. And maybe that's a step that you've already done, but there might be another person who actually, for a variety of reasons, hasn't had the opportunity yet, or hasn't had the resources or the community to support them to do that type of assessment. Erin, maybe we can go through this one and talk about some of the steps. Do you want to name another one?
Sure. I mean, one that comes up a lot in our MBA course and in correspondence with others is actually taking that action to move any savings to a local credit union away from a multinational, and moving savings that are in the market and just conventional market rate returns into maybe an ESG fund, environment, social, and governance funds, or a fossil fuel free fund. So these are some steps that, even with strong movements like the Move Your Money movement and awareness raising campaigns about how important it is to move one's money away from banks that are causing so much harm and destruction in deforestation and the speculative real estate market, by funding big oil, by essentially fueling the climate crisis, and moving our assets away from those into credit unions, into local banks that tend to loan to our neighbors and loan to local businesses. Even with a lot of popular awareness campaigns, we still find every day, I haven't done that yet. Maybe there's bureaucratic challenges, there's administration. Who even has time for administration? We're going to hold people in compassionate, accountable, loving embrace around how can we support you? What do you need to take that step? And that would be an example of an action that people could take out of this.
Totally. And then another step, or in the steps, would be identifying the top 3 aspects of your personal budget that can be reduced through reskilling or personal production or sharing, bartering, or any other next economy living strategy that's not cash transactional. And how do you share? How do you barter? How do you do personal production? Or what reskilling options are there? Those are all aspects of this learning community that we'll be sharing resources and then mutual ideation on. And maybe there's another step then of like reducing expenditures on new durable goods, things like clothing and so forth, to shifting it to the reuse stream, for example, thrift, and treating purchases that you do make in durable goods as investments in high quality, multi-generational heirloom type purchases. We'll talk about how to do that. Or maybe a step is with a notion of identifying where you want to reskill, actually investing in your education to reskill in a certain area with the explicit intent to reduce your personal cost of living and to increase the gifts essentially that you can provide to your family and community through the expression of that new skill. And that new skill could be craft or making clothing, making furniture, growing food. There's so many different ways to reskill in so many areas of your life, depending on your budget assessment that you might have done in a different step.
One of the things that comes up for me, Kevin, when we think about these steps is a quote I heard a long time ago: feeding 2 birds with 1 scone. And we're talking just about the realm of financial resilience. Arbitrarily, these are some steps that we've plopped under that category, but you can see how there's overlap. In terms of reducing our expenditures, sometimes that requires us building skills in the space of food stewardship or consumption patterns around what we eat and where that comes from. If it comes from, earlier today, I went on a walk around my neighborhood and I harvested, half a pound of olives that I'm going to make my own olives with. And so the overlaps of how do we stack in kind of a multiplicity of co-benefits when we're taking action so that we can really make it sustainable for our lives is another theme we'll grapple with together. And really, I don't have all the answers to that, but it's something I'm really curious about. And I'm curious about how collective wisdom can unlock some of that with the really creative strategies that others in the room are going to bring.
Everybody's going to have so much to contribute, I think, to the learning community, and we'll be documenting and listing, growing a database of co-created resources for making it easier and easier for others to take some of these steps. Another step in financial resilience is actually aiming to reduce your expense budget by 10 to 20% by resource sharing, conservation or abstinence by not, transacting, bulk purchasing, barter, or other exchange. Another part of this step could be developing an investment policy statement, which I know people are thinking like, isn't that what foundations do or something like that? But you could actually, as an individual, create your own investment policy statement to determine how you might allocate any savings that you've just created by reducing your expenses 10 to 20% into different types of investments, like making a direct investment into a community serving enterprise. And we'll talk about, well, somebody might be saying like, how do I do that? Turns out there's lots of resources and examples we'll share about how people are doing that. It's not science fiction. And you might be like, well, what's a direct investment? Or what are we talking about here? This could be like $500, $100, $50, $1,000 into organizations that are serving the community where you can play a role, which could contribute to funding for retirement or for just community impact as a different way of allocating resources than by just having it in a bank or in Wall Street. So again, we're sharing some examples from financial resilience, but like Erin said, all these strategies are actually nested across all those domains of steps.
And Kevin, you said this earlier, but when we think about the most exemplary person who's, sustaining their caloric needs through local bioregional food and, has a off-grid living building challenge house and all the things, even the aspect of building community is a place where a lot of people can take a next step. And so, within the financial realm, coaching others in the community how to transform their savings into direct investments or local savings activities or reducing their income needs. It's like once each one of us has tried a step and taken it on, then we have the personal experience to be able to share what happened and what we learned with others. And so that's another realm on that path within the financial resilience track, if you will.
And so I just want to name one more step again, because we want to paint, there's a plethora, and each person might be coming at a different starting point. But in the financial resilience, there's a step of maybe divesting 100% from the need for any financial income and any interest or passive returns. So obviously, there's a lot of other steps that might need to be taken to get to that step, but it doesn't have to be linear. So some people in the community would be like, that's my next step. And I want to know how to just finish off that last piece of what I'm trying to work on for financial resilience. And we'll find that other people will be at a different place. And so this idea of like, how can we support each other no matter where we're starting and no matter what our next step is, everybody's going to have a next step to align their living, their habits, behaviors, and norms with their values towards a world that could work for everybody with nobody left out. And I wish if there were another place where this were happening, I would say we'd be very satisfied to participate ourselves. But as far as we could tell today, Next Economy Living is our best attempt to respond to what we've heard is needed out there and what we see as needed. And if you know otherwise, let us know, please, because we're very interested in this type of transformation, this cultural transformation happening in the world. That's the outcome. But if you find this interesting, we want to learn from you and learn with you, and let's do it together.
And Kevin, I love that you were so bold and courageous as to name that divesting 100% from the need for financial income and any interest or passive returns. So just for those folks, the listeners that might be like, wait, that's even happened? I want to just share that exists. The examples of people that have done that actually are tangibly here. One that just comes to mind is Peace Pilgrim, a woman that did divest from reliance on money and walked around the country, around the so-called United States Turtle Island, not using money to mediate her food needs. And of course, she's nested in a system of reliance on others and reliance on community. And we need so many more examples of people that are doing that type of level of divestment. And we also need to bear witness to the examples that already exist so that they don't continue to get marginalized and continue to get excluded from our imagination of what is possible. So, Kevin, I know we have spoken a lot already. I'm so excited to embark on this learning journey with you and with others who are listening in. And with that, any final thoughts?
Would love to see you. So if you're finding, this is interesting, I want to know more, or maybe I'd like to try joining this community or try it on, you're invited. We'd love to hear from you. So please consider yourself invited, and it's something that we're going to do together. There's nobody who has this all figured out that I've ever encountered. Everybody I've met so far has another step to take, and it's very difficult to do it alone. So thank you for your interest. If it's something like, this is something that's very interesting to me, and I'm excited to get to know you.
And the simplest way to engage right now, if that interest is there, is to join these question and answer free intro sessions that we're hosting this fall, 2024. And if those aren't accessible to you, email us or reach out on social media to either myself or Kevin. Share what you're interested in and see if there's a way that we can collaborate and learn together. Thank you so much for listening. Feel free to share this podcast with others that might also be interested in similar topics. And we'll see you at the free intro sessions.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.